Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City. I'm Lynda Garlick, the Seminary Intern for this year, and I extend a special welcome to our visitors today, and really all of you, because I was told there would not be very many people here. So welcome. Our opening words are from Fulgence Nada Diamana. When strangers meet, endless possibilities emerge, new experiences and new ways of understanding, new ways of taking action. When strangers meet, each pays special attention to the other. Each is called to serve something larger than the self. Today, this morning, let's light the chalice for openness, for willingness to grow, for rich curiosity, and for common purpose. Symbol of light and of knowledge, symbol of warmth and of freedom, we light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love.
May I also extend my welcome to you as the assistant minister of this congregation, and I bring to you this meditation. The theme of today's worship is living the queer in God's creation. We are confronted with the word queer, a word which has in times past held a derogatory and even painful connotation, yet now has been reclaimed, blessed, given a place of honor and celebration. Queerness and heresy are sisters in our philosophy, two ways of reveling in difference, of dancing in fearlessness and curiosity. Today, we announce to the world that creation is not a command, but a dialogue between divine and human. And if we are made in the image of God, to the extent that God exists, surely God must be queer. I now invite you to join me in a spirit of reverence as we pray or reflect together. Spirit of creation, we join in celebrating all the ways there are to be human, all the ways there are to give and to receive love, all the shapes and styles of bodies in which we can make our homes. We are astonished by the richness and the fullness of it all, and we give thanks. Help us to recognize ourselves in one another and to celebrate our differences. Help us especially to recognize those for whom simply inhabiting their own skin causes them to suffer at the hands of others, and to hold these precious ones with extra care. Let this house be always a place of safety, of welcome, and of unabashed wonder and joy. Blessed be. This poem, Mattering, was written anonymously by a gay high school student and has been adapted by the Unitarian Universalist religious educator, Dr. Mark Hicks. My father asked if I am gay. I asked, "Does it matter?" He said, "No, not really." I said, "Yes." He said, "Get out of my life." I guess it mattered. My friend asked why I talk about race so much. I asked, "Does it matter?" He said, "No, not really." So I told him. He said, "You need to get that chip off your shoulder." I guess it mattered. My neighbor asked why I put that ramp up to my front door. I said, "Does it matter?" He said, "No, not really." I told him, "Because it made my life easier." He said, "Is there a way to make it less obvious?" I guess it mattered. A member of my church asked why I like gospel music. I asked, "Does it matter?" She said, "No, not really." I told her that it connects me to my Southern Christian childhood. She said, "I think you're in denial about your oppression." I guess it mattered. My God asked me, "Do you love yourself?" I said, "Does it matter?" She said, "Yes!" I said, "How can I love myself? I am gay, Latino, disabled, and a Christian in a hostile climate." She said, "That is the way I made you. Nothing will ever matter again."
More new songs for congregational singing. Hopefully most of you picked up a copy of Apple Anyone, or if you can see one over the shoulder of someone close by, we'll give it a shot. We actually have done this once before, but it's been a while. It's not terribly difficult. I'll play it through once and then we'll just sing it. It's got to repeat, so we wind up singing it twice. It's pretty easy. Stand up and let's give it a shot.
Y'all are doing a great job with the singing today. Keep it up. It's getting to be the holidays. And with the holidays, that means lots more activities, which means lots more announcements. So be sure and check out what's in your order of service as I draw your attention to just a few that are extra special. First of all, there's a rumor going around that a certain somebody has rejoined us this morning. David, welcome back. And also Tom is back. Hey! This evening, we continue our Jazz Vespers series, and we are happy to say that Reverend Tom will be back, though perhaps with a lean. Now, they say that a lean indicates the authenticity of the music, but he need not have gone to such lengths for authenticity. In any way, we will have music this evening as a tribute to George Michael, so it's going to be great fun. Please join us. And speaking of great fun, if you like doing crafts, and you like the environment, and you'd like to send a 20-foot-long message to the White House about Bears Ears National Monument, please join us in Elliott Hall tomorrow evening, and we're going to make that big banner together. And then you can help us carry it up to the state capitol on Saturday, December the 2nd, and we're going to hold it up really high where everybody all the way to Washington can see it. So do join us for those. Elliott Hall is looking a lot merrier today because the giving tree is up, it's shiny, and the gift tags are waiting. This year, as in previous years, we are partnering with our sister congregation, San Esteban Iglesia Episcopal, to purchase holiday gifts for their families in need. You can ask questions at the religious education table should you have any. The gifts need to be wrapped, labeled, and brought back by December 10th. In that merry spirit, our ministry staff and volunteers are busily preparing worship for the holidays, including our annual solstice celebration. If you are interested in being one of our solstice singers this year, please contact Holly Stewart. Her email address is in your order of service. And finally, if you are a part of our new Caring Network, you are invited to a potluck and inaugural training session on Monday, December 4th, starting at 6:30 p.m. It'll be right here in Elliott Hall. Please bring a dish to share with 6 to 8 people and bring your ideas about how to help members of our congregation who are facing personal challenges, such as illness or bereavement. And that's it for this time. And now I invite you to greet your friends, neighbors, visitors who are next to you as we collect today's offering.
You're a little rowdier crowd than the earlier service. So I hope that works to my benefit. I hope each of you enjoyed a bounteous Thanksgiving. Apparently the stakes were much higher this year. I don't know if you noticed some of the headlines in the news, advising us on how to avoid the hazards and perils of this all-important once-a-year dinner. Some of them read, "Americans prefer a politics-free dinner at Thanksgiving," "How to enjoy Thanksgiving without swallowing the stereotypes," "Is your Thanksgiving more Norman Rockwell or Game of Thrones?" There was one that was a cross-cultural menu ideas for a code switch Thanksgiving, suggesting mixing up the menu to disrupt the political discourse. Another one, struggling with a family Thanksgiving, how to get through it, according to the experts. For those of you who planned and prepared for weeks or days in advance for this day of Thanksgiving, who did you welcome at your table? And for those of you who were an invited guest, did you feel welcomed or unwelcomed? Did you look around and find yourself at a table with a familiar trope of people or strangers, or familiar people estranged? Did you find common ground, or find that you had nothing in common to ground? Was your Thanksgiving table one of inclusion in which all felt welcomed, stranger and kin alike, where differences were celebrated with grateful hearts, love of good food and drink? Or was your Thanksgiving table one of exclusion in which only those who were the same as you dominated the celebration? The food was good, the table was dry, and some were left to feel uninvited, perhaps even lonely in their midst. Could anyone sit at your table and feel comfortable? Or would only the few privileged? Holidays can be tricky, sticky business, especially with families. At my family's table, I have to check part of myself at the door. At that table, I'm the odd one, and often feel unseen and unheard. They mean well, and I make for a pleasant guest, but they operate from a gospel of exclusion. You see, I'm not chosen. I have not been baptized as one of their own, nor confirmed into their way of knowing. And I would not even be considered righteous enough to earn the label of apostate. My discourse has to be well-intentioned so as not to be dangerous, combative, or argumentative. And I'm hardly a shapeshifter, yet I continue to choose, for as long as I'm invited, to put myself at the table with my family, to try to see with new eyes of possible openings and to listen deeply with respect, and to love, to love big in spite of their gospel of exclusion. Because I would never want them to feel not seen, not heard, or unloved. And here at the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake, I feel accepted and welcomed. I feel I can enter in and be my whole self and take a seat at the table. And everyone, it seems, is welcome at the table. But do they feel welcomed? Do we go out of our way to include everyone, to make them feel a part or connected to? Before I go into the theological response and/or justification of living the queer in God's creation and our responsibility, so buckle up because you know I will, I want to address the term queer. You heard Monica in her earlier in the meditation talk about the meaning. For some people it's shocking, and for some it's still distasteful, and for others it's liberating. Once used as a derogatory epithet against really anyone outside of the heterosexual binary, it was used to create fear and shame and to differentiate and marginalize. I'm using it here to reclaim it from its rotten roots, to expand its use to include not only the familiar identities of lesbian, gays, bisexual, and transgender persons, but to expand its use to actively challenging the binary gender stereotypes that pervade our society, which demand gender conformity and refuse to allow for fluidity and flexibility in self-expression and self-understanding. I would even venture to say that many of us, if not most of us, in this sanctuary are queer, even those of us who are heterosexual. My hope by the end of this discourse is that you would feel moved towards queering yourself as a liberative action. While we have made progress with the recognition of same-sex marriage and other movements toward equality, we still have a long ways to go in regards to dismantling heterosexual privilege as the prevailing norm. Our language is still very gendered towards the binary of male and female, and we still live in the shadow with its effects of Mormon privilege, and we must confront while finding a way to work together. While our young people are more likely to identify as non-binary, someone whose identity falls in between or outside of the man and woman gender binary, which should move the dial some, sadly, youth suicide now is the leading cause of death for Utah kids ages 11 to 17. And as of September, 425 suicides have been reported. The youth suicide rate has tripled in Utah since 2007, and it's the largest increase in the country. It's a complex issue, and we cannot attribute it to one cause. However, we do know that our LGBT youth have an 8 times higher risk of suicide. And when they come out, they risk bullying, rejection by family and community, and the LDS Church and the culture does not help. We also know the issues for our queer and trans youth are greater of homelessness, violence, employment discrimination, poverty, and health care. And tragically, 2017 is on record for the deadliest year for transgender people in the U.S. This past Monday, a day of remembrance was held here in this sanctuary for the purpose of remembering our transgender community. They still go mostly unsupported and continue to be misunderstood, even within the LGBT rubric. We must do better. In August of this year, during the annual conference of the Southern Baptist Convention, the Nashville Statement, as it is now known, was released. It was signed by more than 150 evangelical Christian leaders. It presents a complementarian view of gender and a traditionalist view of sexuality. The statement sets forth the signatories' opposition to LGBT sexuality and same-sex marriage. And lest we forget that Trump, in June of 2016, after the Pulse nightclub shooting, assured the LGBT community, "I'm a real friend." And as the saying goes, with friends like that, who needs enemies? Actions speak louder than words. Worldwide, there are many countries that have barbaric laws against LGBT folks. So there is social justice work to be done. As long as one of us is not equal, none of us are equal. This sermon's genesis started after I finished a course this summer called Queer Feminist Biblical Interpretation. I took it because it met a requirement. I wasn't thrilled about it. I was quite burned out after a difficult spring semester. And if I could have dropped the course before the deadline, I would have. But I resisted and I persisted, and while my poor grade reflects the lateness of my work, it does not, however, reflect the unexpected catharsis that came out of the work in the course. One of the texts that we used was Daring Guest's book entitled When Deborah Meets Jael, in which she lays out 4 principles that we can use to living the queer in God's creation and help us toward the call of inclusion. Now, I want you to keep in mind as I go through these that we are going to set a table for a feast of love. And I want you to think about who will be your guests. How will you open yourselves to them, and how will you make them feel welcome? The first principle that Guest gives us is that of resistance. It's making a commitment to the hermeneutic of heterosuspicion. We must resist interpretations pushed on us by what is considered the heteronorm through the lens of heteronormative behavior. It is resisting that very first idea in the book of Genesis that God created man and woman, making heterosexual the norm, by which all things would be made judged and rooted in, and by which anything else would be labeled aberrant. Historically, we have been invisible and absent and written out of history. In biblical terms, and as was made clear in the Nashville Statement and held by many fundamental brands of Christianity, the emphasized valorization of motherhood, injunctions to comply with notions of gender complementarity, with textual admonitions to otherize and condemn same-sex activities. So thinking about your table and your feast of love, what are some of the ways that we can resist the heteronorm assumptions at our feast? Guest's second principle is one of rupture. It's a commitment to the disruption of sex-gender binaries. The texts of terror or clobber passages in biblical scripture have often been used to drive an anti-queer religious and political discourse throughout the world. These have been used to set homosexuals apart from heterosexuals to continue the belief that homo-hetero binary was already established within biblical scripture and that the homosexual element of that binary is therefore denounced as sinful and unnatural. The biblical text denotes the threat of assimilation and otherizes anything that is foreign and not like them. And that's the same pattern used by many churches who condemn queers and otherize them by pushing them to the margins or out the doors. We love you, but we don't love your queerness. You can be part of us as long as you don't act out your desires. It's disrupting the simple notions of blue is for boys, pink is for girls, girls play with dolls, boys play with trucks, big boys don't cry, and on and on and on. The third principle is that of reclamation. We reclaim when we reimagine or we read against the grain to incorporate those identifying as queer and to imagine ourselves in places of acceptance. For many, it is to imagine their queer self within the biblical narrative, using critical imagination much like the Jewish tradition of Midrash, which allows for deep questioning and plumbing the meaning of the Torah for inclusion. I found myself reclaiming something that I had given up a long time ago when I walked through those doors. An inclusive church and a path forward, and it makes seminary so much easier to be affiliated with the church. So how might we act against the grain of heteronormativity to be more inclusive at our feast, at our table of love, and how might we help our guests in their reclamation of their queer self? Guest's fourth principle of re-engagement is a commitment to making a difference. Queer hermeneutics or theology resides in the company of those liberation theologies and approaches that overtly acknowledge the relevance of scholarship to contemporary, personal, and social issues of people who have experienced oppression. But no matter how reformed or how liberal we may think we are, if our traditions, practices, texts, and rituals incorporate ideas that exclude and cause harm, our queer guests will feel unwelcomed at our table, and they will leave. Living the queer in God's creation is committing ourselves to liberative and social justice of including everyone at our table. It is consciously setting our intent and educating ourselves about the ways we can be more inclusive rather than sitting back and allowing the world to move around and without us and hoping that the 7 principles of our faith will work themselves out to the highest good of all. No, it will require a conscious commitment to contest homophobia by confronting heterosexual normative behavior as the norm and everything else is aberrant. So what, you may be thinking? As a Unitarian Universalist, I am affirming and accepting of all folks, right? I applaud you. And now I'm asking you to consciously think of what more you can do to queer your table so that all are truly welcome. Living the queer in God's creation goes beyond sex, sexual identity, gender, and gender roles towards oppressive stereotypes that continue to cause suffering. Think of the relentless, pervasive nature of capitalism in our society. It can be queer to challenge this notion that wealth is directly proportional to aptitude and skill, and that poverty is directly proportional to laziness, or that everyone is born equal with an equal opportunity to succeed, or that society is colorblind, and that your prospects for education, jobs, housing are just as good if your name is Jamal or Jesus as it is if you are a Jim or a Jack. You get the idea. Jesus was also pretty queer. If you interpret him as a queer liberator who turns the world upside down and then gets killed for it, it makes for a fascinating read. Jesus grants blessed status to the poor rather than the rich. Jesus eats and drinks with the working class and the sinners rather than the Pharisees. He hangs out with women, even questionable women. And this is not the sin and Savior Jesus that you may have learned in your youth. No, this is the Jesus that asks us to leave your father, leave your mother, your sister, your brother, to come follow him and to create a community of love, Jesus. This is the Jesus that disrupted the social order of his time in order to create a community based on love and equality. That's a queer Jesus, and a very different proclamation of the family. It is one of our own choosing. For my final paper in the Queer Feminist Biblical Interpretation course, I decided to take a look at Genesis. Because for me, I had believed for a long time it was the beginning that I had attributed so much dislocation of my own identity. But as I wrote, a couple of things came to light. In my youth, I had been interpreting the Genesis creation story as an inventory list, and when I did not find myself created therein, I was kind of mad about it. A little bit sad, but mostly mad. Were you to read it again, you would see that not every part of creation is named. It's not an inventory list. There's a great deal that happens between the night and the day, as well as a grand spectrum between the man and the woman in that God's creation. As I wrote that paper, what became clear to me that my younger self's anxiety was not related to finding myself in God's creation, but rather something much more personal. It was an anxiety about finding myself in my mother's creation because I couldn't have been more different. She would have loved hearing that final paper and my discovery. And gratefully, as I grew up, we grew together to heal those earlier misunderstandings. And that grade could never reflect this liberating moment for me. So it's good I stuck with the class. So now as we move into the holiday season, we must acknowledge that this is not a good time of cheer for everyone. It's difficult for many. It can emphasize our displacement in the world or feelings of loneliness and aloneness. So may each of us be compassionate as we enter into this holiday season and open our table to include those who may feel displaced or lonely. And may we invite all to the feast at our table of love as we live out the queer in God's creation. Let it be so. And I did queer the songs if you didn't notice.
Stand as you're willing and able, and let's sing the Rainbow Connection.
Thanks for hanging in there with me. Our closing words come from Devon Spear, called Recreation. Lo, your Genesis, like darkness that lingered over the deep. You were cloaked in shadow but still empty, eager for form but lacking in self-made meaning. You placed yourself within someone else's fence. It was only natural. You thought at the time, but the thought nagged at you and teased you. Whose garden? So one day mustered up the courage to leave. And though at times you felt your uncertainty could drown you, neither water nor earth could contain you. You are and have always been the sky. There's no fence to keep you in. There's only vastness and expansiveness for you to begin again and again and again.